Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this live streamed Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northfield. My name is Mary Dorr, and I've been a member of UUFM for 16 years. UUFN is an inclusive community that nurtures spiritual and intellectual growth and fosters ethical and social responsibility. We're grateful to be gathering both online and in person today, and we extend a warm welcome to everyone, both on Zoom and in the sanctuary. If you are a visitor, we're glad you're with us, and we invite you to stay after the service to get acquainted. We welcome your questions and look forward to hearing about you. We are mindful that we gather today with different needs. Whatever brings you here, you are welcome to come as you are and take what feeds you. Please know that technical difficulties may arise, yet we offer our best efforts, not with the goal of perfection, but to allow us to connect with one another while keeping our community safe. Our opening words are by Hannah Roberts Villeneuve. Back in Baltimore, one day we were looking for a parking at some hip new bar as we passed a church, Presbyterian, I think, that had a sign that read, I think, quote, "Good thing church isn't for perfect people, because if it were, you wouldn't be welcome," unquote. Good thing church isn't for perfect people, because I wouldn't be here if that were the case. Because you wouldn't be here if that were the case. Because we wouldn't be here if that were the case. If that were the case, church would sit empty 24 hours and 7 days, waiting for the person whose life has been nothing but perfection. No strife, no heartbreak, no mistakes, no failure. Thank God for the truth that under this roof, there is room for my heart, your heart, our hearts, which have been broken apart by the world, yes, but by our own words and deeds too. Thank God for the truth that under this roof, there is room for my mistakes, your heartache, our abandoned dreams. Thank God for the truth that under this roof, there is room for humanity, for wholeness, for holiness, none of which is perfect. Come, let us bring our full, imperfect, beloved selves into this moment as we worship together. I will light a chalice here in my home, and you are welcome to light one in your home. Our church worship associate, that would be me, will also light the chalice. Oh, that's the one at church. She or he will also light the chalice at church. Please join me in speaking the words on your screen as we light the chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to learn what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. Our opening hymn is Wake Now My Senses. For those of you in our church building, please hum only. On Zoom, you are welcome to sing along with muted mics.
Each week we gather, we carry the sorrows and celebrations of our own lives. If you have a joy or sorrow you would like to share with the group, you can type it into the chat box and I will read it aloud for all those listening. I will also read the joys and sorrows submitted before the service today on our online form. I invite you into a silence of your understanding, holding our own lives and the words in our hearts.
Amen and blessed be. And I have changed my microphone. I don't know if it's better or worse. Okay, oh good. I'm so glad because I want you all to hear this, what I am about to share with you. I invite you to keep your heart centered and open as I share a spoken word poem that in theory could be our reading of the day, but it feels like more of a prayer to me. This poem prayer is by UU minister Amy Patrice Shaw. I mentioned that she is a Unitarian Universalist because she uses the word God, and I know there are those here who do not believe in God, but I want you to know it's a very UU definition of the word. It is life itself calling to her. I invite you to breathe and settle into this space. And when I'm done reading it, I'll pause for a few more breaths of silence before I start my reflection. God gave me a word. I was talking with God the other day because we're cool like that. And God said, hey, I want you to tell people something. And I was kind of busy, so I pretended like I didn't hear. And God poked me and said, I'm not kidding, pay attention. Because while we're cool, we aren't that cool. And I know when I have pushed it way too far. So I put down my coffee cup and I turned around and God said, let me hang a word around your neck so that everyone can see it. And you better speak it when you're out, because I'll know if you don't, and it will be heavy, so heavy on your soul. And a word was hung around my neck to take out to the people standing in the streets. A word was preached into my ear and laid into my mouth and burned into my heart until all I could see was the shape of the word, and the word was all, and the word was love. And God said, now get out, because you don't have all day, and that word is going to get heavier, and you've got some work yet to do. So I'm taking my word out into the world. Love came down on this green earth. Love came down and turned over the tables and set the world on its end. Love made it clear that it was the word for the poor and the brokenhearted, for the queer boy and the angry girl. Love was the word for late night hookers and the long haul truckers, for the heroin junkie and the runaway cutters. Love was the word for all of the screwed up and pushed over and too tired and I can't take it no more. Love was the word for the HIV patient and the man with no papers. Love was the word for me and for you, for the saints and the sinners and the scramblers in between. Love came down and made a way for there to be a way, and then love said, we are never going back. Love said, we are all a part of something bigger, and if you cannot rise with us, if you cannot live with us, if you cannot love with us, then you should get the hell out of the way, because we aren't going anywhere and you are in the path. Love came down for the world to know, and I'm holding out this word. So even when you and God are just like that, you can't pretend you didn't know. I cannot put it down, not for a politician spewing hatred, not for a minister vomiting out bile in the costume of a saint, not for money or for country or for kin. I'm holding my word in my mouth, because the next time I see God, I want to be able to say, you gave me a word and I carried it just the way you asked. You gave it to me and I took it. I showed it to everyone I met. You gave it to me and I showed it to her and Gear and Z and him. I showed it to them and they and those over there. I never put it down. I can never put it down. I was talking with God the other day, because we're cool like that. And God said, hey, I want you to tell people something. And I was still kind of busy, so I pretended like I didn't hear. And God said, I'm not kidding. Pay attention, because while we're cool, we aren't that cool. And I know when I have pushed it too far. So I put down my coffee cup and I turned around, and then God gave me a word, and now I've given it to you. Start moving. And God said, let me hang a word around your neck so that everyone can see it, and you better speak it with your when you're out, because I'll know if you don't, and it will be heavy, so heavy on your soul. And the word was love. Love, the kind of love that liberates all, isn't easy breezy, light, and inconsequential. We feel the weight of what it means to care for this hurting world in our very souls. This is the kind of love that demands something from us, a courageous and fierce love that does not hide or shrink or choose who's worthy. This is the kind of love I hear in these words from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. If you were the type of people to shout out an amen during worship, and to be clear, I know some of you are, I think this is the kind of quote that would inspire that sort of outburst. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Amen, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. But Unitarian Universalist relationship with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his call for racial justice is more complicated than our enthusiastic support of inspiring quotes. In 1966, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke at the Unitarian Universalist National Annual Conference as the Ware Lecturer. The title of his speech was "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." And he started off by saying that he felt he was among friends. Unitarian Universalist ministers and lay leaders were his partners in the work of justice. He also stated this in his speech to Unitarian Universalists, quote, "We must make it clear that segregation, whether it's in the public schools, in housing, or in recreational facilities, or in the church itself, is morally wrong and sinful. It is not only sociologically untenable, or politically unsound, or merely economically unwise, it is sinful." That's a harder word to hear. Racism is not just wrong, but sinful. But I think church is where we can not only, but need to talk about difficult and complicated things. Living with intention, our theme for the month, isn't just about inspiring memes and not just memes, and not just about setting intentions, but living them. It's seeing the reality of this world and our own lives more clearly, and then acting accordingly. Unitarian Universalist minister and president of the UU Seminary Starr King School for the Ministry, the Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, tells the story of when she met with Coretta Scott King, widow of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Reverend McNatt was being considered to co-write Coretta Scott King's autobiography, and they met to discuss possibilities. These are Reverend McNatt's words about that meeting. "During an hour of wide-ranging conversation, I mentioned to Coretta Scott King that I was in seminary to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. What frankly surprised me was the look she gave me, one of respect and delight. Oh, I went to Unitarian churches for years, even before I met Martin," she told me, explaining that she had been, since college, a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was popular among Unitarians and Universalists. "And Martin and I went to Unitarian churches when we were in Boston." Reverend McNatt continues, "What surprised and saddened me most was what she said next. The gist of it was this: we gave a lot of thought to becoming Unitarians at one time, but Martin and I realized we could never build a mass movement of Black people if we were Unitarian." What would it have been like if Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King had cast his lot with Unitarian Universalists? It's astounding to think about. Reverend McNatt, herself African American, gives two reasons Martin Luther King didn't join with us. First, what you might guess, race. Even today, over 50 years after Martin Luther King was killed, Unitarian Universalism is certainly not post-racial. Whether we like to admit it or not, our religious institutions are steeped in white culture and white supremacist culture. And the second reason is fully intertwined with the first. Not only was and is Unitarian Universalism a predominantly white religion, but UUism is also filled with predominantly white, middle-class, comfortable theology. To be clear, this is changing. Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism is pushing our very theology to be more grounded in the lived experiences of humanity, not just white liberalism. This change has been a long time coming. Reverend Dr. King outlined this tension between race and liberal religion in his 1960 essay, Pilgrimage to Nonviolence. These are Dr. King's words. There is one phase of liberalism that I hope to cherish always, its devotion to the search for truth, its refusal to abandon the best light of reason. It was the liberal doctrine of human nature that I began to question. The more I observed the tragedies of history and humanity's shameful inclination to choose the low road, the more I came to see the depths and strengths of sin. I came to feel that liberalism had been all too sentimental concerning human nature and that it leaned toward a false idealism. I also came to see that liberalism's superficial optimism concerning human nature caused it to overlook the fact that reason is darkened by sin. When I first read those words of Reverend Dr. King, I thought back to my own seminary experience at a Unitarian Universalist seminary. We hardly ever talked about sin. I think maybe we felt like we didn't need to because we were so much about love and potential and tolerance. But life says, let me hang a word around your neck so that everyone can see it and it will be heavy, so heavy on your soul. Love, real love, the kind of love that changes the world is not innocuous, it's heavy. And so this faith of ours, if it is to have any real impact on the most complicated, most pressing injustices of our time, racism, sexism, homophobia, rising nationalism, climate change, I think, and hear me out here, we need to talk about sin. Some of you may disagree. You may have opinions on why sin definitely should or definitely should not be talked about in a UU congregation. This might be a topic you have wrestled with before, and I look forward to continued conversation. So to start that conversation, some thoughts about sin, starting with this. These words that harken back to my Catholic childhood. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have sinned through my own fault in my thoughts and in my words and what I have done and what I have failed to do. And I ask Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me to the Lord our God. If there are any other former Catholics here, you may have recognized that prayer. You may have even joined along in saying it in your head. For those non-former Catholics, that was the Confiteor, a prayer of confession. It's amazing to me how deeply those words are imprinted on my memory. Though I haven't been Catholic for almost 25 years, those words are still a part of me. I'm not sure how to feel about that. And I've preached about this before, but to summarize, on the one hand, leaving Catholicism was a long and painful process for me, but it was also needed and it was freeing. Leaving Catholicism meant shedding the misogyny and homophobia of Catholicism and donning a religion that was more just and authentic for me. On the other hand, of course, Catholicism is still a part of me, just as whatever childhood religion or no religion you were raised with is a part of you, and there are blessings there. And so the wisdom of that Catholic prayer of confession still speaks to me, even if the theology is very different. My dear friend and UU ministerial colleague, the Reverend Jessica Starr Rockers, offers this translation, this poem prayer based on that Catholic prayer of confession. I confess to you, my community, that I have missed the mark in all the ways, in thoughts, in words, in my actions, and in my complacency. And I ask you to help me. Pray on my behalf. Come to the aid of my soul, that I may be reconciled once again to the holy. Pray on my behalf, dear community. Come to the aid of my soul, that I may be reconciled once again to the holy through community. When I hear those words, I hear an invitation to be accountable for my actions and my inactions because I am a part of a community. They are words of hope and healing. But before I go much farther, what do I mean when I use the word sin? I know there is a lot of baggage with this word, and it's certainly not my task here to convince you to make it a part of your everyday spiritual dictionary. I know the word sin is often weaponized, wielded by those in power to shame and to condemn. It's a word that triggers deep hurt, and for some, not only spiritual pain, but spiritual trauma. Know this. This sermon is not about shame, but about liberation from shame so that we can do the wider work of justice. I think part of our liberation can come from not only seeing sin as something out there, an abstract evil system, but an acknowledgement that we fall short as well. We aren't perfect. Let me offer some definitions of sin that make me curious about how the word might still have much to teach us as you use today. Martin Luther describes a sinner as someone curved in on oneself. Theologian Paul Tillich states sin is separation. Muslim educator and writer Kabir Helminski expands on this idea, stating, separation is the fundamental sin which has countless expressions. Jewish mystic and author Estelle Frankel invites us to quote, consider the possibility that sin might refer to all actions and attitudes that lead people to become alienated from their most whole and holy self. In other words, the notion that sin is what separates us from God can be understood as those actions and attitudes that separate us from our own true being. Sin is those actions and attitudes that alienate us from our most whole and holy self. Yes, in all of these traditions, sin is a severing of connections, an obstacle to creativity, a barrier to love. In our own Unitarian Universalist religious tradition, there's a popular joke that historically, Universalists believed God was too good to damn people, and Unitarians believed people were too good to be damned. There are echoes of this Unitarian belief in our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This is foundational to our ethics and our justice work, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Another time for a hearty amen. I get uncomfortable though, when this principle is oversimplified, when it is used somehow as a statement that we are only good, or that all behaviors in our religious communities are somehow okay. I think this is some of what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was calling out. It's the all lives matter version of theology, a superficial celebration of unity that ignores the actual complex pain of racism. Our tendency as a denomination to be relentlessly positive about human nature can make us gloss over the ways we hurt each other and the way shame corrodes our spiritual lives. Shame is that sense of desperately hiding part of oneself so that no one sees the real you, the broken you. Shame tells us that if people know the real and imperfect us, they won't love us anymore. My proposal here is that we actually need to recognize and deal with those parts of ourselves we so often hide in order to foster more authentic relationships and be more effective in our justice work. As UU Minister Eric Wickstrom reminds us, we're all sinners was never meant to be a condemnation, but a statement of fact, like we're all air breathers. The UU minister, Reverend Robin Bartlett, asks, should we, as Unitarian Universalists, laugh or scoff at the idea of being thought of as sinners? What about those of us who lay in bed at night knowing we have done wrong, wanting so badly to be forgiven, worried that we have to be perfect all the time because we were born simply good? What about those of us wondering if there is something inherently wrong with us because sometimes we miss the good mark? I worry about the kids and adults who lay in bed at night stewing about their brokenness, sure that it means they are defective rather than fully human. We need acknowledgement of our human capacity to harm. When we hide the fact that we are flawed and that we mess up and hurt people, we close ourselves off to authentic connection. Our masks solidify and isolate. When it's more important that I look like a woke white woman than actually dealing with my internalized racism, I curve into myself, I disconnect, I ignore my own complacency. Enter the good news of universalism. Historically, universalism was the belief that because God's love was so great, no one would be condemned to hell. There was universal salvation. All were saved, not just a chosen few. Today, our universalist heritage reminds us there is no power in the universe that is stronger than love. The work of love, the power of love, the promise of love is to break down barriers. If it's building barriers, it's sin. If it's breaking barriers, it's love. I have come to know more and more how this is true on a personal level for me. If sin refers to all actions and attitudes that lead people to become alienated from their most whole and holy self, then universalism, this idea of radical wholeness and all-embracing holiness, is not just for all of us, but for all of me. There is no dark crevice of my heart that love cannot heal. Perhaps this is all a preamble to a confession I need to make. In the words of my Catholic childhood prayer, I have sinned through my own fault in what I have done and what I have failed to do. In what I have failed to do. In this era where Black bodies are shot by the state and brown bodies are judged illegal, and wealth disparity dictates who lives and who dies, and women's bodies are denied agency, in this era, here's my confession. I don't do enough. How can any of us do enough? I have two thoughts here. First, let's just name the white supremacist cultural value of perfectionism as a sin, as a barrier to the work that needs to be done. The pressure to be perfect in our justice work, to do everything all the time, to be the best activists, keeps many of us from taking risks and makes a whole lot of white people think we know the right way to protest. Second, a more specific confession. I am guilty not only of the sin of perfectionism, but the sin of acedia, an ancient word that basically means the inability to care, even to the extent that you can't care that you don't care anymore. Acedia is spiritual sloth. It's when we act or don't act out of our brokenness instead of our lovingness, when we choose complacency instead of connection. The kind of love that liberates and demands something of us is heavier. It's easier to not pick it up. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King calls out the sin of acedia as the sin of white moderates. He argues complacency is perhaps more threatening to racial justice than conflict. These are his words. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed in the white moderates. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens councilor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. End quote. Convenient, devoted to order, lukewarm. As a white woman who is just fine with my comfortable little life, for me, it helps to label this complacency, this acedia, as a sin. But I cannot give in to racial justice fatigue. I don't want to sleep through the revolution. Love demands more from me, and I won't set it down, won't let it down. How can I work to dismantle white supremacy culture in the world if I don't care enough to address it in my own heart? As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to address the systemic sins of Islamophobia, racism, white supremacy, misogyny, patriarchy, homophobia, ableism, and all the barriers to love that create this maze of disconnect we live in. If we make that word abstract, something out there, we miss the mark. In the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, perhaps the worst sin in life is knowing right and not doing it. I am convicted by these words. I confess I don't do enough. I confess to my Creator and to you, my community, that I have missed the mark in all the ways, in my thoughts and words, in my actions, and in my complacency. I make this confession without shame, knowing that to ignore my shortcomings does nothing to heal my soul or propel me into action, because we have work to do. I was talking with God the other day because we're cool like that, and God said, hey, I want you to tell people something. And I was still kind of busy, so I pretended like I didn't hear. And God said, I'm not kidding, pay attention, because while we're cool, we aren't that cool, and I know when I've pushed it too far. So I put down my coffee cup, and I turned around, and then God gave me a word, and that word was love, and now I've given it to you. Start moving.
We now join together in a responsive reading to reinforce our connections to each other and to recommit to the work of building the beloved community. After each phrase I read, we'll all respond with, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. The words will be on your screen. You may remain muted, but Susie and Wyman will unmute as representative of the shared response. A Litany of Atonement by Reverend Robert Eller Isaacs. for remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For losing sight of our unity.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
And now we all join together in our hymn of affirmation, Love Will Guide Us. We turn our attention now to the wider world as we take our offertory. Our Share the Plate donations for January goes to Girls Taking Action, GTA. Girls Taking Action strives to motivate, empower, and educate girls across the globe. By actualizing their personal leadership, these girls create positive social change in their own local community. To date, GTA has impacted over 3,000 middle school and high school girls throughout Minnesota, Michigan, and Georgia, as well as Guatemala, Kenya, and Liberia. Girls in their program are twice as likely to attend post-secondary education, with 95% graduating from high school on time and 75% attending college. Please give generously to change a girl's life and to change the world. You may contribute now right online by going to our website, uunorthfield.org, clicking on the yellow donate button on the right-hand column, and then selecting share the plate. Or you can mail a check made payable to UUFN with offering basket written in the memo line. Separate checks marked UUFN pledge are also welcome. If you are at our church building, please put cash or a check, again made out to UUFN with offering basket on the memo line, in the basket. And as always, thank you for giving as you are able.
As the donations are pouring in, I will say, I will definitely put a link. I see the question in chat for a link to the reading. I'm going to also put the link to the church's Facebook page, which shared that quote. If any of you are on Facebook and you start interacting with those posts, more people in Northfield will start seeing them. And that's one way that we cannot keep ourselves a secret. So I will post both the Facebook page and also the link in chat. And now our closing words. Fitted for This Day by Kimberly Quinn Johnson. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are not perfect, but we are perfectly fitted for this day. We are not without fault, but we can be honest to face our past as we chart a new future. We are the ones we have been waiting for. May we be bold and courageous to chart that new future. May we have faith in a future that is not known. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We join together in singing or humming our final hymn, Spirit of Life.
Please join me as we extinguish our chalice here and in your homes. You will see the words on your screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go in peace.